Here is a sentence that stops in the wrong place. They said if I told you they would kill. That is all of it. That is every word a man got out on a front porch in Tennessee on a Tuesday morning in September. And then his lungs quit on him, and the sentence just hung there, unfinished, for 12 days. 12 days is a long time to carry half a sentence around. A father can build 9 different endings for it before lunch, and 8 of them are about his daughter, and the 9th one is worse. I am Nathan, and I have spent a lot of time reading about people who get destroyed by ordinary paperwork, but this one taught me something I did not expect. I thought this story was about a shooting. It is not. It is about a line on a spreadsheet that saved 1.5 employees per shift, and about 9 people who died because of that line, and about the fact that the man who could prove it inspected doors for a living. So here is what I want you to hold while we go. Somebody paid a locksmith $900 to leave one lock broken. $900. That is the entire budget of the plan that almost worked. Everything else they got for free, because everything else was already in the house. Emmett Trask had a saying he used on young soldiers, and he had used it so many times that it stopped sounding like anything and became just a thing he said, the way a man says drive safe. A door is a decision, not a hallway, not a hole in a wall, a decision. He had earned the right to say it. 11 years in the United States Army, most of them as a combat engineer, the last 4 as an instructor teaching mechanical, ballistic, and thermal methods of entry to men who would go on to use them in places he was not allowed to name in a bar. He knew what a hollow metal door weighed. He knew that the hinge side of a residential door fails at about 1,100 pounds, and the strike side fails at about 400 because of a screw length nobody thinks about. He knew the sound a deadbolt makes when the frame lets go of it, which is not a crack, but a sort of tired sigh, like the house is embarrassed. At 42 he was out, and he had turned all of that into a business so unglamorous that people at parties changed the subject. Trask Door and Hardware. 1 white van with a magnet sign, 2 employees, a shop in a metal building on Bell Foundry Road in Sedgley, Tennessee, and a specialty almost nobody else in Nashoba County held. Emmett was certified to inspect fire doors. That is a real thing, and most people have never heard of it. Every fire door in every hospital, school, nursing home, and apartment corridor in the country is supposed to be inspected once a year by somebody qualified, and it is supposed to be documented, and there are about a dozen ways a door can fail that inspection. The gap under it, the gap at the meeting stile, whether the latch actually throws, whether the closer still closes it, whether somebody has taken a screwdriver to it because it was slamming and waking people up. Emmett was good at it because he was patient in a way that annoyed people. He carried a gauge that measured how many pounds of force it took to open a door. He carried feeler gauges and a flashlight with a bad thumb switch he refused to replace. He photographed everything. Every door he inspected got a photograph, and every photograph carried a date, and every date went into a file, and every file went into a fireproof cabinet in the shop, and also onto a hard drive at his house on Larkhill Road. He did not think of himself as a man who kept records. He thought of himself as a man who did not want to argue. The other thing about the house on Larkhill Road was his daughter. Odette Trask was 9 years old, went by Odie, and had decided at some point around age 6 that the sky was the most interesting thing anybody had ever failed to pay attention to. She had a rain gauge zip tied to the porch rail. She had a thermometer with a cracked face that read 2 degrees low, and she knew it read 2 degrees low, and she corrected for it in pen. And she had a barometer, a real one, brass and glass, that her father had bought at an estate sale for $11 because the needle still moved. Every morning before school and every evening before bed, Odie went out on the porch in whatever she was wearing and wrote 4 things in a composition notebook: date, time, temperature, pressure, and then a 5th thing, which she had added herself because she was 9 and the notebook had a wide margin. What I saw. Emmett did not fully understand the barometer thing, but he understood a person who wrote down what happened at the time it happened, because that was the entire content of his professional life. So he bought her the notebooks. 4 packs of them, wide-ruled, and she was on her 11th. His wife found all of it a little bit much. Talia Trask had grown up in a family where nobody wrote anything down, because in her family, what happened was whatever the family agreed had happened. She was 39. She managed the front office of a dental practice. She was funny in a dry, exhausted way, and she loved her daughter with an anxious intensity that Emmett had learned to read as weather of its own. And her last name, before she married him, was Ostrander. In Nashoba County, that name did not mean much to people under 60. Everybody over 60 knew exactly what it meant, because at some point, everybody over 60 had a mother or an aunt or a husband who ended up in one of the buildings. Havenmore Care Group, 41 facilities across 4 states. Assisted living, skilled nursing, and what the brochures called memory care, and what everybody else called the locked wing. Ambrose Ostrander started it in 1979, with one building and a bank loan he talked his way into, and by 2019, he had a corporate office with a fountain in the lobby and a photograph of himself shaking hands with a governor. Emmett had married into that. He had gone to the Thanksgivings. He had sat in a leather chair in Ambrose's study, while the old man explained, kindly, that the reason America was struggling was that nobody wanted to work. He had watched Marguerite Ostrander, Talia's mother, run a room of 40 people like a woman conducting an orchestra she found slightly disappointing, and he had watched Pierce Ostrander, Talia's older brother, get handed a vice presidency at 31. For a while, it had even been good for him. In 2021, Havenmore gave Trask Door and Hardware the fire door inspection contract for 11 facilities. It was the biggest thing that had ever happened to his business. Emmett knew exactly what it was, too. It was not a favor to him. It was a family solving a compliance problem with a son-in-law. He took it anyway, and then he did the job. The thing about doing the job is that a fire door does not know who your wife's father is. In March of 2022, Emmett Trask spent 9 days walking Havenmore at Sedgley, which was the flagship, the one with the fountain out front to match the one in the corporate lobby. 206 openings. He inspected all of them. He found what he expected in a building that age. Some door bottoms worn past tolerance. A few labels painted over so many times you could not read the rating anymore. A stairwell door with a hole drilled through it for a cable, which is the kind of thing that turns a 90-minute door into a decoration. And then he got to Larkspur Hall. Larkspur Hall was the memory care wing. 32 residents, a horseshoe of rooms around a central common area, a nurse's station, and a corridor with cross-corridor doors that were supposed to hold smoke back long enough for a slow evacuation of people who cannot be told what is happening. Every single resident room door in Larkspur Hall had been disabled. Not damaged, disabled, carefully, by somebody who knew what they were doing. The self-closing arms had been unhooked from the top of 31 doors, and the arms had been swung back and tucked against the frames where you would not notice them unless you looked up. And on 9 of those doors, the latch bolts had been depressed and taped flat with clear packing tape, so the doors would not even click shut. On 2 doors, somebody had gone further and set the closer's spring tension to 0, which takes a special wrench and about 4 minutes. Emmett stood in that corridor for a long time. Then he did the thing he always did. He photographed all of it. 31 doors, 141 photographs, every one of them time-stamped, plus 14 photographs of the cross-corridor doors, which had been wedged with rubber chocks that were worn shiny from use. He asked the charge nurse about it, an aide named Yolanda Kraft who had worked in Larkspur for 11 years and who everybody called Yoli. She did not lie to him. She said, in the flat voice of a woman who had said it before, that the doors got disabled because the doors slamming at night made the residents scream, and because you cannot hear a fall through a closed door, and because since the spring, there had been 1 aide covering Larkspur and half of Aspen after 11 p.m. instead of 2. 1 aide, she said, for 51 people. Emmett wrote that down too. His report ran 43 pages. He did not editorialize in it, because a report that editorializes gets dismissed as an opinion. He listed each opening, the code section, the deficiency, and the photograph number. On the summary page, he wrote 1 sentence that was not technical, because he thought somebody should have to read it. In its current condition, Larkspur Hall will not compartmentalize smoke, and its occupants cannot self-evacuate. He hand-delivered a copy to the administrator. He emailed a copy to Pierce Ostrander's office. And because he was a man who did not want to argue, he also mailed a copy. certified, return receipt requested, to Havenmore Care Group Corporate, and when the little green card came back with a signature on it, he taped it to the inside cover of the file. He did all of that on the 12th of October 2022. Then he went to Thanksgiving. He has described that Thanksgiving to a federal grand jury, so we know how it went. There was a moment, after the pie, when Ambrose Ostrander put a hand on his shoulder and said he had read the report, and that he appreciated thoroughness, and that the thing about a family business was that everybody had to be a team player. Emmett said he was happy to be a team player, and that the fix would run about $19,000 in hardware and a week of labor, and that he would do it at cost. Ambrose said that was not what he meant. Marguerite, drying a serving dish, said the trouble with young men was that they had never had to make a payroll. Pierce, 41 years old and pink from wine, said the report was a liability document, and asked whether Emmett understood that he had just created a piece of paper that a plaintiff's attorney could wave around in a courtroom for the next 20 years. Emmett said that the paper was not the liability. The doors were. He and Talia drove home in silence, and on the way she cried and said he did not have to be like this about everything, and he said he did have to be like this about this. And in the driveway she said something that he thought about for the next 2 years. She said, "They are not going to fix it. They are going to fix you." In January of 2023, Havenmore Care Group did not renew the inspection contract with Trask Door and Hardware. In February, Havenmore's fire door inspections were taken in-house, under a consultant named Ruel Mabry. Ruel Mabry was 47 years old and had been, for 9 years, a county fire inspector in the next county over. He had resigned in 2018 for reasons that were listed as personal. He had a laminated card and a company called Mabry Life Safety Compliance, and his company had exactly one client. Between February 2023 and December 2023, Ruel Mabry certified 1,104 fire door openings across Havenmore's Tennessee and Kentucky facilities as inspected and compliant. He did it alone. He billed for 11 working days. Nobody at Havenmore asked how a man inspects 1,104 doors in 11 days, because everybody at Havenmore understood that the answer was that he did not. Larkspur Hall was certified compliant on the 19th of September 2023 at 10:40 in the morning, according to the form. Ruel Mabry's signature is on it. Every opening is marked pass. The fire started on the 14th of February 2024 at about 2:10 in the morning in a resident room in Larkspur Hall, in a recliner, from a heating pad with a frayed cord that had been in that room for 6 years. 9 people died. Not one of them died of burns. That is the detail Emmett Trask could never get out of his head afterward, and it is the detail that made the case, eventually. They died of smoke inhalation, in their beds, in rooms with doors standing open, in a corridor whose cross-corridor doors were chalked with rubber wedges worn shiny from use, on a shift with one aide. The aide was Yoli Kraft. She was 58. She got 11 residents out. She went back in a 4th time, and a firefighter carried her out, and she spent 9 days on oxygen. The state's report, when it came out in the fall, found that the fire had been caused by an unattended electrical appliance, and that smoke spread had been aggravated by doors that failed to close. It attributed the door condition to, and I am quoting the report, staff practice at the unit level. Staff practice at the unit level. Havenmore fired Yoli Kraft in October of 2024 for propping fire doors. She had never in her life set a rubber chalk in that corridor. They were there when she was hired. Emmett Trask read about the fire on his phone at 6:40 in the morning on the 14th of February, standing on his porch in the cold while his daughter took the temperature. He went inside. He opened the fireproof cabinet. He took out a 43-page report, 155 photographs, and a green certified mail card with a signature on it, and he sat down on the shop floor with all of it in his lap, and he stayed there until his employees came in at 8. By the following spring, 3 families had lawyers, and the lawyers had subpoenas, and one of the subpoenas had Emmett's name on it. By that summer, there was a federal grand jury in Nashville looking at Havenmore Care Group because 11 of the 41 facilities took Medicare money, and lying to Medicare about life safety compliance is a federal crime with a number attached to it. Emmett Trask's deposition in the civil case was calendared for the 3rd of September, 2025. The locksmith came on the 2nd. The 2nd of September was a Tuesday, and it was going to be hot. Odie wrote it down at 6:38 in the morning. 71 degrees, corrected. Pressure 29.94 and steady. What I saw, nothing. Talia left for the dental office at 7:20. Odie's bus came at 7:41. Emmett was standing at the kitchen sink at 8:05 with a cup of coffee, going over the deposition folder one more time, when a white van pulled into his driveway. It said Guerrero Lock and Key on the side, with a phone number and a cartoon key wearing sunglasses. Emmett had not called a locksmith. The man who got out was maybe 38, average height, in a polo shirt with the same cartoon key embroidered on the chest. He had a green canvas tool bag. He came up the walk and he stopped about 4 feet short of the porch steps, which Emmett noticed, because people either come to your door or they do not, and a man who stops 4 feet short has something wrong with him. His name was Abel Guerrero. He had a shop in a strip center on Quarrier Street, a wife named Marisol who did his books, and a 6-year-old son named Teo. He had been a locksmith for 14 years. He had never been arrested for anything, not once, not even a speeding ticket in the last 9 years, which is its own kind of biography. He said, "Are you Mr. Trask?" Emmett said he was. Abel said, "I am here to rekey your exterior doors. Front, back, and the door from the garage." He looked at the paper in his hand and he said, "It is prepaid." Emmett set his coffee on the rail. He said, "Prepaid by who?" And that is when Abel Guerrero's hands started shaking. It was not subtle. Emmett watched a grown man's hands begin to shake so badly that the work order crackled, and Abel put the bag down on the walk very carefully, the way you set down something that could go off, and then he came up 2 steps and got close enough that Emmett could smell coffee and sweat on him, and he started to whisper. Emmett Trask has repeated what Abel said that morning under oath twice, and both times he got it word for word, because he had been trained for 11 years to remember exactly what a frightened person tells you in the 4 seconds before something happens. Abel said, "Sir, I did this house last week too." He said, "For a woman. She paid me cash. She paid me $900. He said, "She paid me to leave 1 lock broken. Not all of them. 1. The upstairs bedroom on the corner. The girl's room. I put the new cylinder in, and I set the tailpiece so it never engages, so it looks locked, and it is not. And I left the window latch backed off, and I have not slept since Thursday." He said, "They are parked behind the hedge right now. The gray car. It has been there since 7. And then he said, "They said if I told you, they would kill." That is where it stops. There are 2 reasons the sentence stops there, and Emmett understood the first one about a quarter of a second before it happened, because he was looking at Abel Guerrero's face when a small red dot slid up out of nowhere onto the man's forehead, from the left, unhurried, and settled just above his eyebrow. Here is the thing that saved a life that morning, and it is not courage. It is 11 years of a very specific kind of school. A visible red laser, in full daylight, at 40 yards, is almost useless as an aiming device. The beam washes out. You cannot see your own dot on your target past about 25 yards in bright sun. Every serious shooter in the world knows this. Snipers do not advertise. Nobody who intends to hit you with a rifle turns on a light to tell you first. So a red dot on a man's forehead in the sunlight is not a sight. It is a message. And the message has a direction in it, because a message like that has exactly one purpose, which is to make the people who see it move somewhere. Emmett did not think any of that in words. What he did was grab Abel Guerrero by the collar and the belt and take him sideways off the steps, into the recessed alcove of the doorway, and go down on top of him. The shot came while they were falling. It did not come from the hedge. It came from above and behind them, from inside the house, through the open window of the corner bedroom on the 2nd floor, his daughter's room, the room with the lock that only looked locked. The bullet went through Abel Guerrero's upper back on the right side, about 2 inches below the shoulder blade, at a steep downward angle, and out the front of his chest, and it buried itself in the porch decking, and later a man from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation would dig it out and measure that angle, and the angle would end at a windowsill. There was no second shot. There was a car door, somewhere past the hedge, and an engine, and then nothing but a 9-year-old girl's wind chime. Abel Guerrero made a sound like a man trying to drink something, and then he stopped making any sound at all, and his chest was moving in a way that chests should not move, sucking in on one side, and Emmett Trask, lying on top of him on his own porch, understood that this man was going to be dead in about 90 seconds. Every soldier who has ever gone through a breacher course has also gone through a lot of medical training, because the two things live next to each other for obvious reasons. Emmett had recertified as a combat lifesaver 5 times, and he had never stopped carrying the kit, because a man who spends his day around metal doors and grinders and other men's power tools carries a trauma kit the way other people carry jumper cables. It was in the van. The van was 30 feet away in the driveway, in the open. He went and got it. He was on the sidewalk and in the open for 11 seconds, which he could not have told you at the time, and which the Bracken family's doorbell camera across the street established later. And nobody shot at him, and that fact would matter enormously in about 4 days. He came back with the bag. He got a chest seal on the entrance wound, and a chest seal on the exit wound, and Abel's chest kept doing the wrong thing, and so Emmett Trask took a 14-gauge decompression needle out of a plastic sleeve, counted ribs on a dying man's chest with 2 fingers on his own porch, and put it in. The air came out with a hiss you could hear. Abel Guerrero started breathing. Emmett called 911 at 8:19 a.m. He gave the address, the nature of the wound, the direction of fire, and the make of the car behind the hedge. He stayed on the line for 6 minutes and 40 seconds. And in all 6 minutes and 40 seconds, while a man bled on his boards and a laser had come out of nowhere and a rifle had been fired from inside his own home, Emmett Trask did not go into the house. He never went up those stairs. The dispatcher asked him twice whether anyone was inside. He said he did not know. The dispatcher told him to get to a safe place, and he said he was staying with the patient. And when the first deputy arrived at 8:26, Emmett Trask was sitting on his own front walk with his back against his van and both hands up and empty, and the first thing he said was, "The shot came from the upstairs corner window, and I have not been in the house." That decision, which took him no time at all, and which he could not fully explain for weeks, is the reason this story does not end at Chapter 3 with a father in a county jail. Because when they finally went up there, this is what was in Odette Trask's bedroom. The window was open 6 inches, which is exactly as far as it opens, because there is a child safety stop screwed into the track that Emmett had installed himself when she was 5. The screen had been lifted out and set against the wall. 2 pillows, hers, were stacked on the windowsill and compressed in a way that pillows do not compress from sleeping. On the sill, in the paint, there were 2 small fresh crescent scuffs about 9 inches apart, the width of a bipod. There was 1 fired cartridge case on the carpet under the bed, .308 caliber, and it had been wiped. There was a smell in the room that a deputy with 11 years on the job identified out loud before anyone else said anything. And there was no rifle. There was, however, a rifle missing from the gun safe in Emmett Trask's garage. A bolt-action .308 that had belonged to his father, which he had not fired in 4 years, whose serial number was on a federal form with his name on it. The safe was open. Nothing else in it had been touched. Not the pistol, not the cash box, not the $2,000 of Snap-on tools sitting on the bench 8 feet away. They had come in through a lock that only looked locked, taken exactly one thing out of that garage, walked upstairs into a 9-year-old's bedroom, and waited for a locksmith who had been prepaid to arrive at 8 o'clock. Now think about what that room was supposed to look like. If Emmett Trask, hearing a shot and seeing a laser and finding a man dying on his porch, had done what 9 out of 10 men do, which is run into his own house and up his own stairs toward the room his daughter sleeps in, then his fingerprints would have been on that windowsill. His DNA would have been in that room, which it already was, but now it would be in that room in a way that a jury hears differently. His hands would have been on his father's rifle, because it would still have been in there, and a man who finds a rifle picks it up. And his 911 call, made from inside, would have put him upstairs in a house where a man had just been shot from upstairs with his gun. They did not need him convicted. That is the part people miss. They needed him charged. Because a witness who is under indictment for shooting a locksmith in his daughter's bedroom does not get to stand up in a federal courtroom and explain what he found in Larkspur Hall in March of 2022. He gets impeached in the first 90 seconds. 43 pages, 155 photographs, a green certified mail card, 9 dead people, and 1 aide who lost her career. All of it goes in the garbage, and it goes in the garbage for free, because the government cannot put a murderer on the stand and expect anybody to believe him about doors. The whole plan cost $900 and 1 lock, and it failed because a man who had spent his adult life teaching other men that a door is a decision looked at the door of his own house and decided not to go through it. They still took him in. Of course they did. A man is shot on your porch with a rifle from your gun safe fired from your daughter's bedroom, and you are the only adult on the property. Detective Imelda Frayne of the Nashoba County Sheriff's Office was 44 years old, had a voice like a woman who had quit smoking twice, and she sat across a table from Emmett Trask for 11 hours and 40 minutes. 2 things came out of that room. The first was that Frayne, about hour 7, stopped asking him where he had been and started asking him why a man with a rifle in his own house would go get a trauma kit 30 feet away in the open. She had already seen the Bracken doorbell footage by then. 11 seconds, standing on a sidewalk, no cover, back to the hedge. Nobody shoots at him. She played it 4 times. She said, "Why didn't they shoot you?" Emmett said, "Because they were never going to shoot me." He said, "If I am dead, I am a dead witness with a file. If I am charged, I am a liar with a file." He said, "They wanted the second one." Frayne did not agree with him, but she wrote it down, and Emmett Trask noticed that she wrote it down, and that was the beginning of the only piece of luck he got in the entire month of September. The second thing that came out of that room was the phone. At 1:40 in the afternoon, while Emmett was still in it, a crime scene tech pulled a cheap prepaid Android out of the gutter on the north side of the Trask house, where a downspout had caught it. It had been activated 11 days earlier at a big box store in Clarksville, paid for in cash. It contained 1 thread of 41 text messages between itself and a number belonging to Marisol Guerrero, the locksmith's wife. The messages were an affair, a short, ugly, completely fabricated affair, running back 3 weeks, ending at 11:52 the night before with a threat. The phone was supposed to be found in Emmett's house, or on his person, or in his van. It ended up in a gutter because whoever threw it at the roof on their way out did not account for a downspout, which is an extremely small mistake and, if you want a measure of how thin the whole thing was, a decisive one. A burner in a gutter reads as planted. A burner in a nightstand reads as a motive. Marisol Guerrero had never sent or received a single one of those texts. Her actual phone, sitting in her purse in a hospital waiting room in Nashville while surgeons worked on her husband, proved it inside 2 hours. They released Emmett Trask at 11:20 that night without charging him. And when he got home, there were no lights on in his house, because his house was a crime scene with tape across the porch, and his wife and daughter were at Marguerite Ostrander's. Talia had made that decision at about 10 o'clock that morning, and she had made it, as far as anybody can tell, out of pure animal fear. Her husband was in an interview room. A man had been shot on her porch. Her mother had called her and said, "Bring the baby here," and she had brought the baby there. Odie stayed at her grandmother's for 9 days. 9 days in the house of the woman who had put $900 in an envelope. Emmett slept in the shop on Bell Foundry Road on a cot he had used for hunting trips, and on the 3rd day something happened that changed the shape of the next 2 months. His daughter called him from her grandmother's landline at 6:40 in the morning, which was, if you think about it, exactly the time she always went out on a porch. She said, "Dad, I don't have my notebook." He said, "Which one?" She said, "The one I'm in. It's on my desk. Can you get it? Because I'm losing days." She was 9, and she was worried about the integrity of a data set, and Emmett Trask sat down on a concrete floor with the phone against his ear and understood that he had been thinking about this the wrong way for 3 days. He had been trying to be believed. That was the mistake. Being believed was the one thing that had been taken away from him on purpose, deliberately, as the entire object of the exercise. You cannot argue your way back into credibility with the people who spent $900 removing it. So he stopped. He went back to being an inspector. An inspection is not an argument. An inspection is a list of openings, and for each opening, a condition, a code reference, and a photograph with a date on it. It does not care whether anyone believes it. It sits in a cabinet and it waits. He got the notebook out of evidence 11 days later. He read all of it. On the page for Thursday, the 28th of August, at 6:41 in the morning, Emmett Trask had written 74 degrees. Corrected. Pressure 29.71, falling. And in the margin, in pencil, in the handwriting of a 9-year-old who did not know she was writing the most important document in a federal case, she had written this. A white van, Guerrero lock and key. A man with a green bag. Grandma Margie's car was here first. Mom's car was gone. He was here 51 minutes. Grandma Margie did not say hi to me. 51 minutes. She had timed it because she timed everything. Emmett read that 4 times, and then he went and sat in his van in the parking lot of a Dollar General for about 20 minutes. Because up until 6:41 on that page, he had been living with the worst version of the sentence Abel Guerrero never finished. He did this house last week. For a woman. And Emmett had a woman in his house, and that woman had taken his daughter to her mother's. And there is a kind of arithmetic a man does at 3 in the morning that he would not admit to in daylight. The woman was not Talia. Talia's car was gone. Talia was at work, and her time clock at the dental practice said so. The woman was Marguerite Ostrander, 64 years old, who had driven to her son-in-law's house on a Thursday morning while her daughter was at work, let a locksmith in, stood there for 51 minutes while he rekeyed 3 doors and sabotaged a 4th, handed him an envelope, and walked past her granddaughter on the porch without saying hello. That last detail is the one that made a federal prosecutor's voice change when he read it to a jury. She did not say hi to me. The rest of September, Emmett spent building a file, and he built it the way he built every other file in his life, one opening at a time. Opening 1, the lock itself. Abel Guerrero's shop had a work order system because Marisol ran the books and Marisol was organized. There were 2 work orders for 4114 Lark Hill Road, 11 days apart. The first, on the 28th of August, prepaid in cash, no customer name, 3 cylinders and 1 interior deadbolt, and in the notes field, in Abel's own shorthand, the words, tailpiece not eng per cust, per customer. He had written down that the customer asked for it. Opening 2. The photograph. Abel Guerrero, terrified, 48 years old in his soul and 38 on paper, had done one thing on that Thursday that no part of anybody's plan accounted for. Standing in a 9-year-old's bedroom with a lock in his hand that he had just been paid to sabotage, he had taken a picture of it with his phone and emailed the picture to himself, to his own business address, with no subject line and no text. Marisol found it on the 14th of September while looking for an invoice. The photograph shows a quickset cylinder, a tailpiece, and a hand. The metadata shows a date, a time of 9:52 a.m., and GPS coordinates that land on the northeast corner of the 2nd floor of the Trask house. A man who is going to help you commit a crime does not photograph the crime and mail it to himself. A man who is being extorted and has a wife and a 6-year-old and a shop with a cartoon key on the sign does exactly that, because it is the only weapon available to a person with no weapons. Opening 3. Marisol. Emmett drove to Nashville on the 16th of September and stood in a hospital family room and introduced himself to a woman whose husband was on a ventilator in a medically induced coma with a chest tube and 11 staples, and told her that he was the man on whose porch it had happened, and that her husband had saved his daughter's life on purpose and at enormous cost, and that he was going to pay for the shop's rent until Abel could work. She hit him once, open-handed, and then she sat down and cried, and then she got her purse and showed him the email. Opening 4. Tansy. Tansy Ostrander was 17 years old, Pierce's daughter, Odie's cousin, and she had spent the summers of 2022 and 2023 working as an activities aide at Havenmore at Sedgley, because her grandfather believed in that sort of thing. She met Emmett at a gas station on the state route on the 22nd of September because he texted her, and she answered, which nobody in that family expected. She had 91 photographs on her phone from July of 2023. They were not evidence photographs. They were 17-year-old photographs. Her friend making a face. A resident named Alma Dorfler holding a plastic flamingo. A cake. But in the background of 11 of them, in the corridor of Larkspur Hall, 7 months before the fire and 2 months before Ruel Mabry certified every one of those doors as compliant, you can see resident room doors standing wide open with their closer arms unhooked and folded back against the frames. And in the background of one photograph, taken on the 29th of July, 2023, a rubber door chalk is visible under a cross-corridor door, and the chalk is worn shiny. Tansy said, "I always thought that was gross. I thought that was just how nursing homes were." Then she said the thing that a grand jury heard in March, and that broke her father's defense in half. She said, "Uncle Emmett, my dad told me not to post any pictures from work, ever. That was a rule." Then the paper wall came down on him, which is what always happens when a man with no money finds something a family with money cannot afford to have found. On the 29th of September, Havenmore's outside counsel filed a motion to exclude Emmett Trask as an expert witness in the civil case, on the grounds that he was a family member with a financial grievance, that his certification had lapsed for 11 days in 2023, and that he was, and this is the phrase in the filing, the subject of an active homicide investigation. He was not the subject of anything, but an active investigation is a true sentence about any person who has been interviewed, and the filing was not written for a judge. It was written to be forwarded. It got forwarded. In 8 days, Emmett Trask lost the fire door contracts for 3 elementary schools, a Baptist church, and the county courthouse annex, which was $141,000 of annual revenue out of a business that grossed $210,000. Talia moved out on the 12th. Not to her mother's, which mattered, to a rental on Quarrier Street with Odie, and she filed for a temporary parenting plan that gave Emmett every other weekend, and her filing used the words unstable environment. She was not lying. His environment was, by any definition, unstable. A man had been shot on the porch. And this is where Emmett Trask did the only thing in this entire story that I think a normal person would not have done. And it is not the part with the doors. It is that he did not fight the parenting plan. He signed it. He agreed to every other weekend, in writing, on the 21st of October, and he told his lawyer, a woman named Rosalie Amankwa who charged him nothing after the first invoice, that a fight over custody in a county courthouse in Nashoba County against the Ostrander family was a fight he could only lose slowly and expensively, and that there was a faster way to end it. She said, "What is the faster way?" He said, "I take away the reason." The reason went away because of a piece of cast aluminum. Farrell Okonkwo, who everybody had called Fez since 2009 and who had been Emmett's partner through 2 rotations and 4 years of teaching, was now an instructor at the State Fire Academy in Bell Buckle. He drove down on a Sunday in October with a 6-pack and a caliper and no particular plan except to sit with his friend, and at about 11 at night, on the floor of the shop, looking at a photograph of a Larkspur Hall door closer, he said the sentence that ended the Ostrander family. He said, "What is the date code on that housing?" Every door closer made by every major manufacturer in the United States has a date code. It is cast or stamped into the aluminum body of the unit, usually a 2-digit year and a 2-digit week, sometimes a Julian day, and it is there because manufacturers warranty these things for 10 to 30 years, and they need to know when they built them. Nobody looks at it. There is no reason to look at it. It is not part of an inspection. Ruel Mabry's certification for Larkspur Hall, dated the 19th of September 2023, listed every opening in that corridor as inspected, with the hardware described. 14 of the closers in Larkspur Hall on the day of the fire had date codes from 2024, which is not a discrepancy. It is not a paperwork error. It is a physical impossibility, cast into metal, that says a man certified 14 pieces of hardware 7 months before those pieces of hardware existed. Because here is what actually happened. After the fire, in the 3 weeks between the 14th of February and the state's arrival, Havenmore's maintenance department replaced 14 closers in Larkspur Hall. Ruel Mabry supervised it. They were trying to make the corridor look like the corridor he had certified, And they did a good job, and the state investigator was a decent man with 11 facilities on his plate, and nobody on earth thinks to look up at a piece of aluminum and read a 4-digit number. Emmett Trask and Fez Okonkwo went to Larkspur Hall as members of the public on a Thursday afternoon in November, signed the visitor log, walked to the memorial photograph on the wall of the common area, stood there respectfully for a while, and on the way out photographed the tops of 19 doors with a phone held over Fez's head. It took 11 minutes. Then Rosalie Amankwa went and got the last thing, and the last thing was not clever at all. It was a subpoena for Havenmore's document management system audit log. Havenmore, like every company its size, had bought a document system in 2019 that stamps everything. Every scan, every view, every download, with a user and a time, forever. Because that is what the sales brochure promised the compliance department. The 43-page report that Emmett Trask mailed certified on the 12th of October 2022 was scanned into that system on the same day at 4:41 in the afternoon. It was opened 9 times over the following 11 days. 4 of those times, it was opened by the login of Ruel Mabry, 4 months before Ruel Mabry was formally hired. They did not fail to receive the warning. They read it. They hired the man who would bury it, and the system they bought to protect themselves wrote all of it down and kept it for 3 years. None of that would have finished it. That is the hard truth about paper, and Emmett Trask knew it better than anybody, because he had already sent a 43-page report to people who read it and then killed 9 of their own residents. Paper only wins when somebody is forced to answer it in a room where they cannot leave. So he built a room. And to build it, he had to give Ruel Mabry a reason to come back. Here is what he did, and every part of it is on the record, because he told his lawyer and he told Detective Frayne in advance, in writing, both of which she made him do. The first part was a bid. Havenmore's liability carrier had, in November, put the company on notice that renewal in January would require a third-party fire door inspection of all 41 facilities, certified, photographed, with a report per opening. That was not Emmett's doing. That was what happens after 9 people die and a lawsuit gets to discovery. What was Emmett's doing was making sure that Havenmore's insurer learned, in the first week of December, that there was exactly one FFBA-certified fire door inspector within 200 miles who had already inspected the flagship building and whose 2022 baseline could be used for comparison, and that his rate was 2/3 of the national firms, and that his name was Emmett Trask. The insurer's risk engineer thought this was a wonderful idea. He said so in an email that went to 11 people at Havenmore Care Group on the 9th of December 2025. Now put yourself in Ruel Mabry's chair for a second, because that is what Emmett spent 3 weeks doing. Ruel Mabry, 47, signature on 1,104 forged certifications, including the corridor where 9 people suffocated. He has already done the worst thing he will ever do, twice, and both times he did it because he believed the alternative was prison. He is not a hitman. He is a compliance guy. His whole life is making a piece of paper agree with a wall. And now the wall is going to be re-inspected by the one man alive who knows exactly what it looked like in 2022, and who has a photograph of every closer in it. He was always going to come back. The only question was where, and Emmett picked the where. The second part was the doors. In the second week of December, Emmett Trask took every interior door off the second floor of his own house. 11 doors. He drove the hinge pins out with a nail set, carried them down, and hung them on a rack in the garage in order, labeled with masking tape. Then he took the door off Odie's bedroom and the door off the hall bathroom, and he rehung them, both of them, at the top of the stairs, in the hallway, 6 feet apart, both swinging the same direction, with new frames he built out of 2x6, with 3.5-inch screws through the strike plates into the studs, and a rubber wedge on a lanyard hanging off each knob. If you walked up the stairs of that house in December of 2025, you did not arrive in a hallway with rooms off it. You arrived in a corridor, with 2 doors in it, and no rooms at all. He explained it to Rosalie Amankwa exactly once, and she wrote it down verbatim because she is a lawyer. He said, "Their plan needs a room. A room is a story you can tell about a person." There he was, in the room, with the thing. Take the doors off and there is no room. There is no story. There is just a man standing in a house full of doorways, being filmed from 3 angles. And he said, then you put the only door in the building where you want him to end up. The third part was the lock. He did not fix the lock in Odie's bedroom. He left the tailpiece disengaged exactly the way Abel Guerrero had left it, exactly the way it appeared in Abel's photograph, and he left the window latch backed off, and then he put a $19 magnetic contact sensor on the jamb and paired it to his phone. The one broken lock in the house became the only doorbell in the house that mattered. He also put 4 cameras up, none of them hidden, because hidden cameras get argued about. 2 outside in plain sight, 2 inside on tripods in the upstairs corridor, aimed at the 2 doors. The fourth part was his daughter, and this is where I want to be very careful, because this is the part where a lot of stories like this one go wrong, and the man becomes somebody you cannot root for. Odie Trask was not in that house. On the 18th of December, Emmett drove her to Chattanooga and left her with Fez Okonkwo's family, 91 miles away, with her notebook, her barometer, and Fez's wife, who taught 4th grade and thought Odie was the greatest thing that had ever happened to her kitchen table. Talia agreed to it, which tells you something about what Talia had started to understand by December. She agreed to it in a text message at 9:52 at night that said, 4 words, take her, please go. He left the nightlight on in the empty room. He shaped the bed, that is all. The 5th part was the night, and the night came from a 9-year-old. Emmett needed weather, not for drama, for the simple mechanical reason that Ruel Mabry needed a story for an open window in December, and an open window in December in Tennessee is only explainable in one condition, which is the freak warm front that comes up out of the Gulf ahead of a big December storm and puts it at 68 degrees at midnight. Odie had 11 notebooks. Emmett sat on the floor of the shop and read 4 winters of his daughter's handwriting and found that in her data, every single time the pressure dropped below 29.5, with the temperature above 60 in December or January, it rained inside 11 hours, and it rained hard, and it rained warm. On the 29th of December 2025, at 6:41 in the morning, from a kitchen table in Chattanooga, Odette Trask called her father and read him 4 numbers off a brass barometer she had unscrewed from a porch rail and taken with her. 67 degrees, corrected, 29.32, falling. She said, Dad, it's going to be a big one. He said, thank you, and he told her he loved her, and he hung up, and he called Detective Imelda Frayne. They came at 1:20 in the morning on the 30th of December, in warm rain hard enough to fill the gutters, in a gray Malibu that parked 2 streets over on Quarrier and not behind the hedge, because they had learned that much. There were 2 of them, Ruel Mabry and his nephew, Wickham Mabry, 29, who ran a 2-man demolition crew and who had painted a red laser on a locksmith's forehead in September because his uncle told him it was to scare a man and nobody was going to get hurt, and who had not been right since. Wick stayed in the yard by the hedge with a phone. Ruel went to the northeast corner of the house, put an 8-foot ladder against the wall, and went in through the window of a 9-year-old's bedroom, which took him 19 seconds, because the latch was backed off and the lock only looked locked. Emmett Trask's phone lit up on the shop cot at 1:22 a.m. He had not slept in the house in 3 weeks. He was parked on Bell Foundry Road, 400 yards away, with Detective Frayne's unmarked Impala 200 yards behind him, and a deputy named Aurelio Pesce in it, and there was an agreement in place that nobody would move until there was a person inside the structure, because a man on a ladder outside a house is a trespasser, and a man inside a house with a firearm is something else. What Ruel Mabry brought with him, in a soft case over his shoulder, was Emmett Trask's father's rifle. He had kept it for 4 months. It still had Emmett's fingerprints on the stock from 4 years ago, and the bullet in that porch decking would match it, and he was bringing it home to leave it where it belonged, which was the entire second half of a plan that had failed in September. He also brought a printed sheet of paper, folded in 4, in his coat pocket. It was a suicide note. It was 3 paragraphs long. It was written in the first person. It apologized to Marisol Guerrero, and it was signed Emmett Trask. That is what was going to happen in that room. He came in over the sill in the dark, and he stood up in a bedroom with a nightlight on and a shaped bed, and he took 11 or 12 steps, and then the room ran out and did not become a hallway. He was in a corridor, bare doorways on both sides, no door on the bathroom, no door on the linen closet, no door on the master, and nothing to close, nothing to be behind, nothing to be found in. 2 tripods with 2 small red recording lights. And at the far end of the corridor, 40 feet away, 1 single door standing open, with light coming out of it, because the utility room light was on. Every person who has ever been in a hallway in the dark walks toward the only light. Ruel Mabry walked 40 feet down that corridor with a rifle case on his shoulder and a forged suicide note in his coat, and went into the utility room, and he had about 1.5 seconds to understand what the water heater and the furnace and the empty room meant. The door closed behind him. It closed because Emmett Trask, who had been standing in the dark in the doorless doorway of his own bedroom for 4 minutes, stepped out, pulled it, and put a rubber wedge under it with his boot, and then drove 3 screws into the jamb with a cordless driver. That door was a 36-inch solid core slab in a frame Emmett had built himself out of 2x6, with 3.5-inch screws through the strike plate into a doubled stud, and it had no lock on the inside at all, because he had removed the whole cylinder and filled the hole with a steel plate. 1,100 pounds on the hinge side, 400 on the strike side, normally, closer to 2,000, the way he had built it. A man in reasonable shape can generate about 300 pounds of impact force with a shoulder. Emmett Trask stood in his own hallway and did not say anything for a while, and the recording, which ran for 19 minutes and 11 seconds and was played to a jury in Nashville in June, has him saying exactly 4 sentences. He said, "The ladder is still up." He said, "There is no lock on your side because I took it out." He said, "You wanted a room. I took the rooms out of my house." And then, when a man on the other side of a door started screaming that this was kidnapping, Emmett Trask said the last thing, and he said it in the flat voice of a man reading a code section off a clipboard. He said, "It is not a locked room. It is a door with nobody holding it. Push on it for as long as you want. That is what the ones in Larkspur were supposed to do." Then he called it in, and Detective Frayne and Deputy Pessy came up the stairs at 1:31 a.m., and Wickham Mabry was already face down in warm rain in the front yard, and neither of them ever laid a hand on Emmett Trask, because there was nothing to lay a hand on. He was standing in a hallway. His phone was in his hand. Nobody was hurt. Inside the utility room, they found a 47-year-old man, a bolt-action .308, registered to Emmett Trask, and a folded piece of paper in a coat pocket that was going to be the last words of a man who was standing outside the door. Wickham Mabry did not last 2 hours. He gave a statement at 3:40 in the morning, and then at about 4 he told them there was something on his phone, and there was. He had recorded his uncle 4 times, beginning in August, because Wick Mabry, who was not a smart man, had understood one smart thing, which was that when this went wrong, his uncle was going to say it had been the nephew's idea. The recordings include a man explaining, in a truck, that the point of the laser was to make Trask run upstairs. They include a sentence about the note, and they include the reason, which no prosecutor could have gotten any other way, spoken out loud on the 11th of August, 2025, in a parking lot. Ruel Mabry said, "It is not about the money." He said, "I signed 1,100 of them. 9 people are dead, and my name is on that corridor, and if his file gets in front of a jury, I am done, and Pierce knows it, and Pierce told me to handle it, and Marguerite paid for the lock." Abel Guerrero came out of sedation on the 14th of September and was extubated on the 15th, 12 days after a bullet went through him on a porch. He could not talk for another day, and when he could, the first thing he did was make a sound at his wife until she brought him a whiteboard. Emmett Trask was in the doorway of that hospital room on the 16th when Abel finished the sentence. He did not finish it out loud. He wrote it. 4 words, in the shaky capital letters of a man with a chest tube. They said, "The girl." That is the whole thing. That is the last 2 seconds of the sentence that had been hanging in the air for 12 days. Not "I would kill you," not "I would kill me." They said if I told you, they would do it to the girl instead. Ruel Mabry was convicted in June on 19 counts, including attempted first-degree murder, and the 9 reckless homicide counts the state added in March once the date codes were in evidence. He got 51 years. Wickham Mabry took a plea, testified, and got 11. Marguerite Ostrander pleaded guilty in April to conspiracy and witness tampering. She stood up in a federal courtroom in Nashville at 65 years old in a wool coat and said, out loud, in front of her granddaughter's mother, the sentence that people in Nashoba County are still repeating. She said, I asked a man to leave a lock alone. She got 7 years. Pierce Ostrander's staffing directive came out of Havenmore's own file server, dated the 9th of April 2022. 4 paragraphs. It reduced overnight coverage in memory care from 2 aides to 1 across 11 facilities, and it estimated the annual savings, and the estimate was written as 1.5 full-time equivalents per shift. 1.5. That is what Larkspur Hall was worth. He got 22 years. Ambrose Ostrander was found incompetent to stand trial in May, and died in a facility that was not one of his own in October. Havenmore Care Group was sold in pieces. Yolanda Craft's termination was expunged in February. In September, she was hired by the State Fire Marshal's office as a training specialist, and she now teaches a 2-hour block on door hardware to nursing home staff in 4 states, and she opens it the same way every time, by telling a room full of aides that a door that will not latch is not an inconvenience, it is a lie the building is telling you. Talia Trask testified against her mother and her brother in April. She and Emmett divorced in the fall. They share custody now, evenly, and it works. And it is not warm, and Odie is 11 and thinks the arrangement is fine. Abel Guerrero's shop reopened on Quarrier Street in March. Emmett's crew hung the doors, at cost. The cartoon key on the sign still wears sunglasses. And in the common area of what used to be Larkspur Hall, on the wall where the memorial photograph used to hang, there is now a bronze plate with 9 names on it, and mounted above it, in a row, 9 door closers. Real ones? Working ones, out of the box, each one adjusted to 5 pounds of opening force, which is the maximum a person of any age is supposed to have to push against to get out of a room. Odette Trask's composition notebook, the 11th one, was entered into the federal record as Government Exhibit 14. Her page for the 28th of August is the second document in the appendix. She testified for 9 minutes. The last thing the prosecutor asked her was what 29.32 meant, and she explained it to a federal judge, patiently, the way you explain something to a person who has not been paying attention. I want to end this one by giving the other side its due, because I think this story only works if you admit that the plan was good. It was good, graded out. The motive was airtight, because a discredited witness is worth more than a dead one. The instrument was a man with no criminal record, no motive, and a family to lose. The budget was $900. The murder weapon belonged to the victim's own house, taken out of his own safe, and it was going back into it. The crime scene was a child's bedroom, which is the one room in America where a jury will believe anything. The laser was not a weapon. It was a hand on your back, pushing you up a staircase. And the entire operation asked its target to do only one thing, the most natural thing a father can do, which is to run toward his daughter's room. 9 out of 10 men do that. It is not stupidity. It is love, and they were counting on it. They lost on 2 variables they could not buy. The first is that the man they picked had spent 11 years being paid to understand that a door is a decision, and had therefore already made this particular decision, years earlier, in a classroom, for other people's sons. The second is that there was a 9-year-old on that porch every morning at 6:41, writing down the temperature. That is the part I cannot let go of, not the doors. The notebook. A family with 41 buildings and a fountain in the lobby was taken apart by a kid with a composition book and a habit, because a habit is just a record that has not been needed yet. So here is the only thing I am going to ask you to do, and it takes 11 seconds. The next time you are in a building where somebody you love sleeps, a nursing home, a dorm, a hospital wing, a school, put 2 fingers on the door of the room and open it, and then let go and watch. It should close. It should latch. You should hear it. If it does not, somebody made that decision, and they wrote it down somewhere, and it was worth 1.5 people a shift to them. Say something out loud, to a person whose name you get, and then write down the date.